Because of the end of the Houston-Tulsa game, we decided to balance out the universe and have not enough men on the set. It's time to wake up, college football! Yeah, welcome back to Wake Up College Football. My name is Dan Rubenstein. That's not Ryan Nanny. This show got way better looking because Richard Johnson joins us remotely, new SB Nation college football pal from Connecticut. Life is good in Connecticut, I'm assuming. How you doing, Richard?
I'm good. Good morning, good morning.
Well, welcome to your inaugural appearance on Wake Up College Football. What we are going to do today, Richard and everybody watching, is we're going to have a progress report of sorts. Week 7 is in the books, so I don't know if we're going to hand out grades specifically, but we've got excellent work. We've got most improved, and we've got the dreaded unsatisfactory. I think that's a pretty diplomatic way of saying, ooh, this thing might be trash.
Yeah, it's like superlatives in high school these days. They don't make people feel bad anymore. We're not going to make you feel bad. I mean, we probably might, but we're not going to be out with it at least.
Sure. Did you get a high school superlative?
Yeah, I was most likely to be president, I think.
Okay, you have time.
I was student body president in senior year. So
okay,
yeah.
You've got some ways to go until the minimum age of 35, so you're just building up your resume. Not unlike a lot of these teams. Football reference.
Oh, that's good.
You like that?
That's good.
Yeah. All right, so let's start here. A number of huge games yesterday. Games that sort of felt huge by the end. The number 2 and 3 teams in the country went to overtime against teams that either it sort of made sense against, in the case of Wisconsin, and sort of didn't make sense against in the case of North Carolina State. So let's start with excellence. We like to be positive here on the show. So I have down here for my SEC excellence 3 things. Alabama, which I think is sort of unquestioned at this point after their 49-10 romp against Tennessee in Neyland Stadium. Florida's defensive backs specifically, who appear to be possibly the most dynamic special lockdown corners in the country. And I have Missouri defensive lineman Josh Augusta, who wants a Heisman so very badly. So,
he's great.
To you, what embodies excellence right now in the SEC?
I mean, well, it really does start and end with Alabama. I saw a tweet yesterday. Someone was like, oh, they said this Alabama team wasn't that good. And I was like, who? Literally, who said this Alabama team wasn't good? I think what happened with Alabama is, and it happened with me, I realized last weekend that I had only watched Alabama play twice.
Okay.
The Ole Miss game and the USC game in week 1. So, because of the opponents they had, there was like a Western Kentucky in there and like a Chattanooga or something like that.
Right.
And then actually Kentucky. And it was just they played opponents that weren't particularly sexy and they weren't on CBS and they were kind of out of sight, out of mind, steamrolling everybody. And because of that, you kind of forget that this team is so stinking good. I mean, in the beginning of that game, they harassed Josh Dobbs over and over and over again. They scored another defensive touchdown. They scored another special teams touchdown. Tim Williams and Reuben Foster are both absolute monsters. I fear for my safety even watching the TV. And they just are better. And we sat on your couch yesterday and talked about Jalen Hurts. He's a freshman.
Yep.
And they're going to build this thing around him. And it's going to be absolutely terrifying, and it's going to continue to be terrifying as he gets better and as they get better around him on offense.
All right, and you should know better than most as a Florida graduate and person who pays attention to the Florida Gators more than most. They have 2 outstanding corners who now are sort of tasked with playing offense with the quarterback struggles that Florida's been having, and they did so yesterday. I think they had a couple pick sixes. How good does this Florida defensive secondary have to be if they are going to keep winning?
I don't think they have to have 2 pick sixes, but I mean they have to do what they can do. I mean, look, I have numbers for you. Drew Lock, 39 yards through the air to his own team, 117 yards to the other team yesterday. Florida needs to engineer offense in whatever ways they can, whether that's Antonio Callaway figuring it out with punt returns and kick returns, or like it was yesterday, with Tease Tabor and Quincy Wilson returning interceptions for touchdowns. I like I said, I don't think Florida needs to engineer pick sixes. I don't think that's a worthwhile expectation. I think this team is good enough to expect a turnover or two. I know turnovers are largely luck in this sport, and this ball is going to bounce a lot of different ways, but this team is offensively limited enough to need the defense to do something. And I think the defense is good enough for you to expect them to be able to do something like get a turnover, one or two every game. And if Florida's going to hold on, hang on, and win the East, which is attainable,
right?
They're going to have to make it happen, because the offense is not going to blow anybody out coming down the stretch, even if the opponents are, South Carolina and Georgia. Weird things happen in the cocktail party in 2 weeks, so that's going to be very interesting as far as the SEC East goes.
Yep, and we will mention once again Josh Augusta, Missouri defensive lineman, scored a touchdown, campaigning openly for the Heisman Trophy. We love you. Let's quickly move to the Big Ten and Big Ten excellence. Not hard to sort of look at what happened in Week 7 and figure out what was the best thing. It may have been Corey Clement, actually, but in terms of a full team effort and ability to pull out a huge game, Ohio State going on the road to Camp Randall. Does this game tell you anything about either team that we didn't already know going in? Ohio State struggled offensively, especially in the passing game, and Wisconsin's defense was incredible. And I guess the big thing is they can run the ball, which is something they haven't been doing, surprisingly enough.
Yeah, it wasn't even just that they can run the ball. It was that they ran the ball outside. I mean, It was left, it was right. I was amazed at the team speed that Wisconsin was able to show getting outside of the tackles. I did not think when you get horizontal on Ohio State, good things shouldn't happen for you on offense. I was very pleasantly surprised about that. Besides that, though, I mean, Wisconsin's fine. They're not upper echelon Big Ten, but they are the third or fourth best. They're probably the third best team in the Big Ten, and I don't really even have to bat an eyelash about it. No. With Ohio State, they are not complacent anymore, and they're not slogging through games anymore. I think it's not just an Urban Meyer thing, but Urban Meyer's 2009 Florida team and Urban Meyer's last year Ohio State team, they were so dominant, so good, returned so many players. It was supposed to waltz to the national championship game, and they just came out, and there wasn't the fire in the belly there. It was you kind of felt the loss was coming, because one day they were going to come out and sleepwalk and not get it done. And it did in both seasons. This year, it's different. This team's got a carrot on the stick again, and they don't look like they are just kind of going through the motions. You don't come back twice on the road in Camp Randall and win in overtime at night if you don't have some fire in the belly. And Ohio State had it, despite the limitations in the passing game.
Yeah, I think they looked like a different team in the second half, especially when they got Mike Weber going on the ground. As we shift to the Pac-12, obviously, with regard to excellence, it's Washington and Washington alone at this point with what they've done, but they didn't play in Week 7. So we're going to shift to USC, who looked very, very good. A little bit worried about Juju Smith-Schuster getting injured at the end of the game, had some back issues, but USC did what a supposedly, well, we know they're very talented, but what a good team should do against a team that's been struggling and has the injury issues that Arizona has. USC blew them out of the water. And Colorado with a great job, sort of a sort of end-to-end performance against Arizona State. Sefo Liufau comes back and is incredibly efficient. The defense did a great job against what's been mostly a very good Arizona State offense. So like to see that excellence from both of these teams. Colorado is, I believe, tied at the top of the Pac-12 South. Washington sits alone in the North, but USC rounding into form as a team that nobody really wants to play, especially with how improved and good, just flat out good, Sam Darnold, the redshirt freshman quarterback, looks. Any strong thoughts on USC or Colorado?
Yeah, USC doesn't surprise me when they play well, because I know what they have.
Right.
With USC, it's can you do it 2, 3, 4 weeks in a row? And that remains to be seen. Colorado, we love you. We are so happy that you're playing well and that you're back. And they just worked Arizona State. And 40-16 isn't even as out of hand as that game really was.
Yeah. As we move to the Big 12, Oklahoma was obviously the most dominant team in terms of at home, taking it to Kansas State. But I specifically want to highlight Dede Westbrook, who turned in another near 200-yard performance and is squarely in the Biletnikoff conversation. He has to be. He has just been so good and has stretched the field so well for Oklahoma. But I also want to give a little bit of a tip of the cap to West Virginia, the still undefeated West Virginia team, who went to Lubbock and basically shut down a very, very, very good Texas Tech offense and took advantage, particularly on the ground, of Texas Tech's defense in doing a very just what a good team should do against a team with a clear deficiency like Texas Tech. West Virginia looked balanced, they looked organized, they looked like they had a plan, and they have to be considered at the top of the Big 12, not alone, but with a couple of other teams.
Yeah, I think West Virginia got out in front in that game early, and the thing with that is when you get out in front on an air raid team, there's a reasonable expectation of the rebound effect. They're going to throw the ball 80 times, no matter what happens. Texas Tech should be able to, eat into that into that deficit at some point in time, especially with a guy like Pat Mahomes, who is so electric. But that didn't happen. West Virginia got up, stayed up, and kept Texas Tech down on the road too, and that's big. That is a big deal for them. Dede Westbrook is a monster. It's not just Texas's bad defense. This guy is really stinking good.
Yeah, and a receiver at Oklahoma, even a pretty good receiver, should always have huge opportunity with how good those running backs are and how much attention. And we saw that's where Kansas State suffered a little bit. Their defensive backs staring into the offensive backfield, looking at Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon, made a huge difference. Should also shout out, just in terms of pure excellence, Western Michigan. Holy moly, shutting out Akron. PJ Fleck is going to make some money this offseason. So just in terms of pure excellence, how do you not include Western Michigan in that progress report? We will go to most improved now. Let's start with the ACC here, because it's been a strange year, and I'm highlighting North Carolina here, because North Carolina has the emotional win in Tallahassee against Florida State, last-second field goal, and then last week they looked like total garbage against Virginia Tech in a awful weather game. And then they bounce back in another not ideal weather circumstance against Miami and do enough on both sides of the ball. And Miami did run on North Carolina a little bit. That's to be expected. But Mitch Trubisky did a really, really good job finding receivers, extending plays, extending drives. And North Carolina, in terms of ability to bounce back, after week one, we saw like a garbage week from the Tar Heels week one, and then went on a nice run against okay teams. And now they've beaten now they've beaten Florida State and Miami 2 out of 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's peak ACC Coastal. Just up and down, mercurial. North Carolina is the ACC Coastal in a nutshell. But I give them credit. They got up 20-3 over Miami. They were 23 at halftime, and then Miami kind of started to battle back there, and they put the hammer down in the late stages of that game. After kind of, it felt precarious because they have that not a 3-and-out, but they get sacked when it looks like they're going to ice the game, and then they go to punt, and the punt's kind of wonky, and Miami's got 80 yards to drive the field with 2 minutes left, and you kind of think, something's kind of going on here. And then Carolina got Brad Kaya, and they did what they needed to do, and they stopped Miami, and they held on for that game. I don't know what in the world Carolina's going to do down the stretch. Ryan Switzer, I believe, really got shut down yesterday by the Hurricanes.
Yeah. Cornelder was great.
Mitch Trubisky, who we love, and maybe a dark horse Heisman guy, like very dark horse Heisman guy.
End of the hall.
So there's a lot there for North Carolina. They probably won't. I don't expect North Carolina to put it together week to week to week. But can they keep the thing kind of duct taped together enough to win the Coastal Division and go back to the ACC Championship game? Probably.
It's going to be entertaining, and I skipped over ACC excellence, and that's on me, because James Conner yesterday, I don't know if you saw this, Richard, not only did he have over 100 total yards on offense, they put him in situationally on defense to rush the passer and had to hurry. He was very close to a sack, but an amazing spin move. And listen, it's Virginia. Virginia's not all that good, but the fact that James Conner's just like, put me in on deep. Let me at that quarterback. How great is that?
Yeah, like as an offensive tackle, like he gets down in a 3-point stance. It's like 6 foot 230. Like, what are you supposed to do with it? I mean, he's just going to beat you to the spot and get to the quarterback. I imagine it's going to be pretty embarrassing in the film room for Virginia's offensive tackles. when that film gets queued up sometime this week.
Perfect. Let's continue with the most improved. I'm going to go with Wazoo in the Pac-12. They survive a game that never should have been that close without Josh Rosen playing quarterback for UCLA on the road at Pullman. But Wazoo, again, ran the ball in key spots. They almost let UCLA back in the game. And this almost feels like a game that, even though they won the game close last year, it feels like a game that a team would drop. A weird game against a talented UCLA defense, at least, because the offense has been kind of trash this year, especially without Rosen. But Wazoo survives that game and remains efficient, and it still looks like the Pac-12 runs through the Apple Cup, which is very strange to say. So I think we're encouraged by Wazoo, yes?
Yeah, that was perfect. Packed a dark spot. I got home last night really late, like 12:30 or 1 o'clock, and was listening to the game on the radio right about halftime. I went to bed with the full knowledge that that game was going to get weird. And I woke up and realized Washington State held on, which is not what I thought was going to happen. You know, if that game was going to get weird, you imagine UCLA finds a way to just pull it out somehow, just because that's the Pac-12 and that's what happens at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
But Washington State, again, they held on, and they look like they can win that division, or at least get to a point where the Apple Cup is the North Championship game, and that's going to be really cool.
And there's no shame in losing to Eastern Washington, and they lost to Boise State. Obviously, no shame in losing to a ranked team like that. But Washington State, the way that they started, it is quite encouraging that they've improved to this point. The SEC, we have LSU slowly but surely pulling away from Southern Miss in Ed Orgeron's second full game as head coach or interim head coach, behind a lot of action on the ground, but also some big plays through the air. And Arkansas takes a huge step forward, and we don't know if this is going to last all season long because their schedule is just brutal. But Arkansas gets stops on defense when it counts. They score points. I think that's the big thing, is the offensive line protected Austin Allen, and in short yardage situations, we saw Cornelius score at the end of that game. They came through. They had the struggles in the short yardage situations against Texas A&M, and I would suppose new life breathed into the Hog season.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned the offense, but I think it's a much bigger deal that the defense gets stops.
Yeah.
I mean, this game ended in the 50s because of overtime last year, but it was played in the 40s. This game is played lower 30s this year. I think and that may not mean a lot, but with Arkansas, that's a pretty big deal. They are not the Brett Bielema, 3 yards in a cloud of dust Wisconsin thing. Like, they play track meets, and they're kind of equipped to win track meets, which is just weird. If you think about Brett Bielema, whatever. But yeah, the defense stood tall. The defense stood up when they needed to against Chad Kelly, who is like lethal with the deep ball. Coming into this game, he has a 50% completion percentage on throws more than 30 yards, which is phenomenal. I know that doesn't sound great, but that is phenomenal with the deep ball. And so you're able to keep Chad Kelly, in kind of under duress a little bit, and able to limit what they can do in the vertical passing game. And Ole Miss isn't going to run the ball particularly well in a conventional running back sense. And so Arkansas did what they had to do, and it was a good win. Yep,
and LSU certainly moving forward. They had a huge second half in that game. In the Big 12, hey, look, Texas defense. Iowa State's been super frisky. They on both sides of the ball. They've been good. They took Baylor to the end of that game in a shootout. They were good last week. Iowa State is a legit, motivated, interesting team. The record does not reflect that. Iowa State shut out Texas last year. Texas won this game 27-6 behind a really impressive defensive performance. They ran pretty well on the ground. Shane Buechele, I think, had his highest yardage total through the air. Listen, Texas should beat Iowa State every single season. But the fact that they limited them to 6 points, I don't believe anything in the second half, they have to be most improved, right?
Absolutely. With Texas, it was, hey, defense, don't get in the way of us winning the game. Texas is capable enough on offense to score 30 points, and they can do that. Like, that's fine. The defense just has to have a pulse. They had more than a pulse on Saturday. People are going to look at Iowa State's record and say, oh, they're 1-6 or they're 1-5.
Right.
This isn't a great win and da-da-da-da. This is so huge for Texas in a sense of to show that on defense, they can limit people. They have the ability to limit a team offensively and do what they want on defense. For Charlie Strong's tenure, it's a massive deal.
Yep.
For just the internal will of that defense, it's a massive deal. So Texas, but this is the thing with Texas. They look like they're getting in the right direction. Things are fine, and then they implode next week. So can you take it from week to week? I'm not even going to add a third week to that. Just from week to week, 2 weeks. That's all I need from Texas to see that they can build some modicum of consistency.
Richard, every marathon starts with a single step. It starts with a single step. The final team I have under most improved, the Big Ten. Northwestern. Shout out to Roger Sherman. The Northwestern Wildcats lose to both, I believe, Illinois State and Western Michigan, and there's no shame in losing to the Broncos. But Northwestern has now, in this short season at 3-3, they've beaten both division champs from last year in the Big Ten on the road in Iowa and Michigan State. Not the same team, the same teams that we saw from Iowa and Michigan State last year, but still teams that are probably more talented. And Clayton Thorson goes off. Justin Jackson has nearly 200 yards against the Michigan State defense, and we'll perhaps get to Michigan State a little bit later. But Northwestern, yes, they have to be, right? Most improved at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Northwestern has offense that you feel good about.
Weird.
You feel good about it. You feel confident. I mean, they're not going to score 45 points, but they can get a job done.
Yeah.
And so, Northwestern, proud of you. Not just journalism.
Yeah, and they're talented up front on defense. Let's go to the unsatisfactory portion of this, and we don't like to do this. We just want to see our kids. We want to see them rise up. We want to see everybody improve. We want to see steps being taken forward. But
except for Notre Dame.
I don't even have them down here. That goes without saying. That Stanford, pretty good, coming through in that game. Bryce Love, was a warrior in short yardage situations. Solomon Thomas was unblockable and continues to be excellent. And Notre Dame, I guess I could put, Notre Dame, unsatisfactory. Malik Zaire for momentum in this game. Deshaun Kaiser looked sloppy. The offensive line did not look particularly good. And the defense actually showed some life. So what are your thoughts about the unsatisfactory Notre Dame at this 2-5 Notre Dame?
Well, there was a pick six in the game to Stanford, so you gifted a limited Stanford offense points. And Malik Zaire was in that game for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Notre Dame is now 2-5.
3 drives. Yeah. And two of those losses.
3 drives is a long time for Malik Zaire. Malik Zaire should not be on that field for that amount of time. I'm sorry.
And I will be clear about at least how I feel. I don't think the fact that Malik Zaire played gave Notre Dame the loss. I think Deshaun Kaiser struggled. The offensive line struggled. The play calling was weird once again. And the same could be said for the for the Texas loss. But I don't think it helps. I don't think it helps Zaire to come in and out. I don't think it helps Deshaun Kaiser. I don't think it helps the rhythm of the offense. I think that's just 100% on the coaches there. Let's start with unsatisfactory at this point in the SEC. I have down here Georgia's offensive line because their defense did enough to win. Jacob Eason was running for his life, but still really good. The offensive line did the running game no favors. The play calling, especially in short yardage, was a little bit odd for Georgia. To lose to Vandy with that type of performance from a defense and from a quarterback, it's just sort of inexcusable.
Yeah, but I do kind of want to give Vanderbilt credit.
Yes.
This is the statement win for Derek Mason.
Yeah.
This is massive. But the thing with Vanderbilt is the defense isn't bad. The defense could get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
It's a similar situation to Florida. The defense is going to carry the day. Can the offense do enough to put double-digit points on the board? And that Vanderbilt defense just muddy the waters a bit. Mm-hmm. And the Commodores can stun somebody, and that's what they did. I think it's a perfect mix of a Vanderbilt defense that can get the job done against a Georgia offense that at times can't get out of its own way and has a freshman quarterback. And it's just there's a lot of weird that oftentimes goes into that matchup, that Georgia-Vanderbilt matchup throughout the last few years. And it reared its ugly head again on Saturday.
Florida football, a rich man's Vanderbilt. That's what, if you're going to take anything away from this show, that's what Richard Johnson believes. And listen, that's fine. In the Big 12, Texas Tech, unsatisfactory. And it's not even just the defense this time. The defense did the offense no favors, but Texas Tech's offensive line was just, and I hate when I see players wasted. I'm an Oregon fan. Royce Freeman's final year probably at Oregon is going to be a complete waste. And Patrick Mahomes and his talent, and yes, he's beat up, it's sort of a waste with the offensive line and the running game, the performance from Texas Tech across the board yesterday. At home against a good team, they have an opportunity to make a statement. They don't necessarily have to blow the doors off of a good West Virginia team, but to be competitive. And how much longer is Cliff Kingsbury going to be in Lubbock?
Yeah, I wonder about Texas Tech kind of on a global level.
Yeah.
This is homeostasis for Tech. I mean, maybe it's not this bad, but there's more competition in the Big 12 now with Texas schools. You might add somebody else from Texas with Houston coming in. And that bottom tier of the Big 12 is now kind of rising to the top just a little bit.
Yeah.
Iowa State looks better. I know the record's not great, but Iowa State looks better, so that's not a walkover. Baylor is still Baylor, despite what you think about what's happening off the field there. And so there are teams that Texas Tech was able to take advantage of in like 2008, 2009, 2010 to look a lot better than, and that's not happening anymore. And so Texas Tech might kind of have to deal with the reality that this is who they are, despite the fact that Patrick Mahomes is incredible.
Yeah, and maybe outside of West Virginia, because nobody's really lit up the Mountaineers, everybody has a pretty susceptible defense in the conference, which makes it even more unacceptable to have certain offensive shortcomings when everybody's vulnerable. Even West Virginia, you can run on West Virginia a little bit, and it was disappointing to see. In the Big Ten, I have down here Michigan State's defense and run game. What the hell, Michigan State? If we were going to go year over year of the recent Mark D'Antonio years, it's like, well, if nothing else, they're going to be somewhat efficient throwing the ball. And listen, Tyler O'Connor has been pretty good through the air. That hasn't really been the problem. The fact that they can't get going on the ground, and the fact that Northwestern, a team with an offense that's fine, nothing special thus far, is able to move the ball at will against this Michigan State defense. It's week over week, just a complete shock.
Yeah, it is shocking. Shocking is the word. I think for Michigan State, you expect them to play defense. You expect them to play good defense.
Right.
You expect Northwestern to not be able to really move, not necessarily at will.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I didn't expect that to happen from Michigan State, but I think this season, this is what Michigan State is. I trust Mark D'Antonio to get this figured out, but there are some massive growing pains right now in East Lansing going on, and it's only going to get uglier. That's the biggest problem. Yeah. It's going to get worse.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm very happy that Oregon didn't play yesterday, so I don't have to lump them in the unsatisfactory category, but they are unsatisfactory. They are 100% unsatisfactory. I have down here, based on yesterday's games, the Arizona schools, which both have been dealing with quarterback health issues. Manny Wilkins has been beat up. Obviously, Arizona at a certain point went to like their fourth string tight end to take snaps at quarterback yesterday. Brandon Dawkins should be back. But defensively, Arizona's a mess, even though it's a new defensive coordinator, still a mess. Offensively, Khalil Tate, who they started at 17, he's not ready to win big-ish Pac-12 games. Arizona State has been dealing with their own issues. Defensively, they've been really good up front, but pass defense has been bad. And I also have everything about the Utah-Oregon State game. Just because it was raining, Utah's offense has been kind of a mess this year, and luckily Joe Williams played well for them yesterday. But Oregon State and just the whole state in Oregon has been bad. So I guess unsatisfactory Utah, but they're still winning ugly in the Arizona schools.
Yeah, Arizona State, life came at y'all real fast. real fast. I mean, it's like, I know you were talking on your podcast, Dan, that you do the Solid Verbal.
Yep.
You were talking about how Arizona State was kind of a lie at 4-1.
Right.
And kind of not that. And the last 2 weeks have absolutely bore that out. Who we thought they were, not one bit.
Yeah, and I still feel confident that those two coaches, Todd Graham at Arizona State and Rich Rodriguez, have the ability, maybe not to turn things around this year, but through the long term, I think they've proven enough to have faith in them. Whereas with Oregon, going to need to see a lot more. With Oregon State, going to need to see a lot more, but that's a rebuild already. And in the ACC, two of the teams that we felt excellent about at the top of the conference, and we saw them play a couple weeks ago, Clemson and Louisville, each struggle with clearly less talented and inferior opponents, though I am a much bigger believer in NC State, who gave themselves an opportunity to win at the end of that game. Clemson turns the ball over, I believe, 4 times in a win, which they keep doing that, and I don't think it's sustainable, but we'll see. And they have Florida State in a couple weeks. And Louisville gets away with a real eke-out win against Duke. They needed a roughing the kicker penalty to sort of separate themselves at the end of that game. Anything big to take away from the sloppiness of the recent sloppiness of Clemson and Louisville?
Yeah, I think this weekend's sloppiness with Clemson and Louisville have a lot more to do with the opponents than anything else. I do think a better opponent probably crushes Clemson, not just beats, crushes Clemson.
Interesting.
Because of 4 turnovers, especially those 3 turnovers coming out of the second half, or coming out of halftime in the second half. They go interception, fumble, and NC State couldn't really do much with that. They drove down to the 9-yard line and then lost 11 yards over the next 3 plays and missed a field goal. And so, they missed a field goal in which Clemson was playing field goal safe. They didn't have a block on.
Right.
A protector trips and Christian Wilkins waltzes in the backfield and swats it down. I think a better team is able to exploit those weaknesses in Clemson and potentially make that game a little bit out of hand. With Louisville, though, you're right about the turnovers, but, Duke, a little bit of David Cutcliffe magic.
Frisky,
That's kind of what Duke is in the ACC these days. I think Lamar Jackson will probably be fine. I think Louisville will be fine too, especially they don't have much coming down the stretch on that schedule. I think the opponents presented unique challenges for both Louisville and Clemson this week, but I will give them credit because they both rose above, and that's what good teams are supposed to do. Good teams every now and then can win kind of funky, crappy games. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Quickly in the comments, Betsy wants to say, "Hey, what's up?" Hey, Betsy. Thanks for watching, Betsy. Not much. Just hanging with my friend Richard. Next question. Let's go blue. Beat the Buckeyes. All right. Michigan was off this week. What do you think, if anything, Ohio State struggling with a very good Wisconsin team perhaps says about their matchup way down the line against Michigan?
Oh, I think one of the things that I saw it on Twitter, I believe James Light, who is a big scheme guy, he was paying attention to how Wisconsin used a lot of motions and a lot of shifts to beat Ohio State. And we talked about earlier how Wisconsin was able to get on the edges against Ohio State. Well, they were getting on the edges against Ohio State because they didn't really want any part of the interior of Ohio State's defensive line. And I get that. Nick Bosa is one among many of the freaks in the front 7, and they're young. And that should scare the hell out of anybody that's got to play Ohio State for the next 2 or 3 years. Be that as it may. I think Michigan, if you're going to come into that game at the end of the season, perhaps a game plan where you try to get a Jabril Peppers on the outside, maybe some jet sweep action, maybe you try to do some different things to exploit a weakness that Ohio State may have, and that's contained. And so, maybe Michigan gets a little frisky in that game, does some different things, and that game goes a way we don't necessarily expect it to, in a sense of maybe an offensive firepower showdown and not a standard blustery Big Ten football.
Fair enough. All right. That is my friend Richard. Check him out, Richard Johnson. You can find him on the internet. He is the internet's Richard Johnson, SB Nation's Richard Johnson. Please do listen to the Solid Verbal Podcast. Listen to the Shutdown Fullcast. Listen to Podcast Ain't Played Nobody with Bill Connolly and Stephen Godfrey. Thank you for watching. Like the page. We'll keep answering questions in the comments because we're cool like that. We got nothing better to do. Let's hang. Thanks again for watching. See you next week.